A very good evening and welcome to The Bottom Line, a wrap of some of your top business news stories of the day. My name is Nzinga Kunta and we begin as usual with the number of the day. Today that number is $15.1 billion. That's the lending portfolio of the new development bank that's known to a lot of people as the BRICS Bank. The bank released the number after announcing a project in Russia with a loan equivalent of $500 million in December 2019. So that $500 million will go toward establishing an advanced engineering schools at higher education institutions in about 30 institutions in Russia. So that bank was established by Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa in order to fund infrastructure as well as development projects in emerging economies. The over 4-year-old bank last year approved 22 projects from its member countries. So I'm now joined in studio by the bank's Vice President, Leslie Maasdorp. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Let's start with South Africa. There's been about 28 billion rand lent to South African projects with a focus on infrastructure and energy, and about 20 billion rand pledged further to what?
So the bank focuses, as you mentioned, on infrastructure. Infrastructure includes a wide variety of sectors, right? We could be building and expanding existing port infrastructure, building new roads, bridges in terms of transport infrastructure, building new power capacity. You know the country is power scarce right now. Augmenting the solar independent power producer program, for example. Water resource infrastructure is a critical need in the country. So it includes all of those various sectors. Telecoms as well. One of the areas that is critical for economic development today is just access to high-speed internet. So broadband infrastructure also is a very critical ingredient of that agenda.
What of the companies that you've given loans to, advanced loans to, is Eskom? You deal with state-owned enterprises whose balance sheets are stretched and their capacity to borrow is impaired. So how do those kind of transactions make sense to you? Especially, we'll talk about your credit rating a little bit later on, especially with that kind of risk.
Sure. So the bank has a development mandate, right? We are an institution that has development impact as one of our key assessments of how effective we are as an institution. We are commercial in the sense that we make a profit every year. This year we'll make a profit. Last year we'll make a profit of about $150 million for the year. So we are a profit-making institution. But at the same time, when we lend to governments or to state-owned enterprises, we look at the impact and how critical those entities are to economic development. In the case of Eskom is central to the South African economy, not just to the mining industry or to households, everything, because we have a single energy utility providing power to the country. So ensuring that Eskom becomes a sustainable enterprise again, that Eskom is able to provide power at reasonable cost and is a long-term viable state-owned enterprise is very critical for South Africa, and we support that agenda of the country. We are owned by South Africa as well, and therefore we are aligned with the objectives of the government in that sense.
Let's talk about that credit rating, AA+ from companies like Fitch and Moody's. We could only hope for that as a country in South Africa at the moment. And then even higher from perhaps Japanese ratings agencies. How do you maintain that? And talk to us about, even though you've got this developmental agenda and you know that you need to balance risk, there are also challenges when it comes to that.
Yeah. So the rating of the bank is probably one of the biggest achievements, milestones that we have achieved over the last 4.5 years. Our rating, as you just mentioned, is AA+, which is just one notch below the highest you could possibly get. AAA means that you are completely risk-free. There is no possibility or probability that you would default, right? So there are very few institutions that obviously are AAA, and there are very few countries in the world, probably only about 16 or so. In the entire world of 188 countries, there's only 16 that are AAA. So we have a very high credit rating because we have very high capital adequacy, meaning we have been well endowed with capital from the 5 governments, and we have also strong guarantees in place from our 5 countries. What that then means is that it is very cheap for us to raise money when we issue bonds in the international capital markets, and that is really the benefit of the bank. We can provide cheaper finance to our member countries, much lower than what they would if they were borrowing themselves. So let's take South Africa. South Africa right now is BB plus with S&P and with Fitch, and BBB minus with Moody's. When South Africa raises debt, it is much more expensive. Therefore, there's a huge incentive for South African government to come to the bank, and as you've just mentioned, we have 28 billion rand of exposure to South Africa already, and for 2020 we have pledged another 20 billion rand or so.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the manner in which you set up the loans and the manner in which you finance certain institutions as well. Your approval time from looking at a project until saying you're going to give the money is 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily give funding in dollars. Take us through the reasons for both of those.
So firstly, historically, there's always been long bureaucratic processes for big infrastructure projects to be approved. It takes a long time to do due diligence, to do the sort of risk appraisals. That process for a large project of, let's say, the size of $200 million, which roughly on average is what all of our projects comprise of, that process can take up to a year, sometimes 18 months. We have made a commitment to assess and to take to final approval all of that for that to be done within a period of 3 to 6 months. And we've succeeded in doing that. So that's the first one. The second part of your question was about why we provide not only US dollars. The simple reason for that is it is more advantageous, it's better for the client. So if we, for example, lend to Eskom in US dollars, when the rand depreciates, it means that they will need to pay back a lot more, and the rand has lost a lot of value, as you know, over the last number of years. So by providing rands to Eskom, and Eskom gets rand in revenue, there's a match. There's no foreign exchange mismatch for them. So we try to do that in all of our member countries. We've done it in China, we're doing it in Russia, South Africa, Brazil, and so on.
Let's talk about the coronavirus. We've seen Asian markets getting pummeled. Of course, when the world market suffers, South Africa sneezes, South Africa catches a cold. There's also thoughts about central banks having to step in and perhaps stimulate economies going further. How is this going to affect the way you work and the clients that you work with?
Yeah. Look, it's obviously early days now. There are extreme measures being put in place to contain this epidemic, right? I mean, schools now have been closed in all of the major cities. Our bank has also now, people are afforded the opportunity to work from home for the next 3 weeks. So we are not actually at the headquarters right now. There are elaborate plans in place to contain the virus. There's no question. If you compare and draw parallels with 2003 with the outbreak of SARS, that this will have a contractionary effect on economic growth. China is the #1 trading partner to most countries in the world, including South Africa. There's no question that South Africa, Brazil, India, all of our member countries will suffer also from this slowdown. The exact impact is unknown because we don't know, will it take 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 months to contain this epidemic. But the fact that there will be a transmission mechanism affecting us directly is certain.
Leslie Maasdorp, the Vice President of the New Development Bank and their CFO, joining me in studio. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News this evening.